Now, The Hunt Palmer Show.
Waiting to rise again.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show. Brought to you by Corks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
This is the moment you've all been waiting for.
Locking down the middle of the day. Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
Welcome in. Hunt Palmer coming to you from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio downtown in the capital city on this Friday, working towards the weekend. We're brought to you by Corks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp. Got Jacob Beck and Cassie Spazzali back there on the ones and twos and fired up. You're here with us. Been short week for most around. Short week for us here, and we're coming to the end of it here, first week of 2025. And fired up, you're with us, Preston Guy here in 15 minutes talking LSU football. Kevin Ingram is going to jump aboard in 30 minutes. He is the play-by-play voice of the Vanderbilt Commodores. Vanderbilt and LSU to open up SEC basketball play for both of those teams tomorrow inside the PMAC afternoon tip-off. Really excited to talk a little bit about that. Saints finishing things up in Tampa. We'll certainly get a pick for that game. I got to get you set for the NFL weekend, the final weekend of the NFL season, Week 18. My thoughts on LSU and Vanderbilt are coming up, and I want to talk LSU offense and defense, statistically speaking, in the 2024 season. I wrote two pieces. One of them was already up at LouisianaSports.net. The other one will come probably this afternoon or tomorrow, but I thought it was interesting to take a look at those. So we will certainly do all of that and appreciate you being with us. Our Friday show is brought to you by Corks, and we start them each and every day the same way we start that Genesis opening drive.
It's time for Hunt's Opening Drive, presented by Genesis of Baton Rouge.
Every single week, I would take LSU's football opponent, and I would dissect them statistically, and I would see exactly where they stand in regard to the rest of the conference, the rest of the country, and all of the important statistics that you look at. Certainly doesn't tell the entire story, but gives you a sense of what the opponent kind of looks like. I rarely did that with LSU. And now that the dust is settled, I wanted to go back and just kind of do that exercise with this LSU team and see what the numbers say. Because I realize that a lot of y'all don't dive into numbers quite as much as I do, because I'm here talking about it each and every day, and you've got a real job to tend to while I yap about sports. But sometimes the numbers tell you exactly what your eyes see. And sometimes you look at something and you go, huh, really? And with the LSU offense, I would propose that the numbers generally told the story that your eyes saw. With the defense, which I will talk about in hour number 2, and there will be a piece up on LouisianaSports.net about it in the coming hours, the numbers told a little bit of a different story, and it kind of brought me back a little bit. And again, I'll talk about that in the second hour. But let's go into offense. And I realize that like numbers don't play great on radio because you don't have it in front of you, and there's a lot of things bouncing around in your head. So I'm not going to like go over the top into the numbers, but I'll paint the picture and then kind of give my commentary on it, because I think the reviews on LSU's offense this year, when I talk to LSU fans, are a little bit mixed. There are some that feel good about the direction of the offense, that like the quarterback, that felt like the passing ability was there, and that they feel really good about what's to come in 2025 with the LSU offense. There are some that think Garrett Nussmeier is a turnover machine, that Joe Sloan's in over his head, and that the LSU offense wasn't good enough this year. And so I wanted to kind of see what the numbers say, and I'll give you kind of my 2 cents on the whole deal. These are all compared to the rest of the Southeastern Conference. And once again, I feel like I'm tossing in all these caveats, and it is what it is. I know everyone didn't play the same schedule. I know everyone didn't play the same non-conference schedule. I know everybody didn't play the same in-conference schedule. Some teams went on the road to tougher teams. Yeah, if I take Georgia's schedule and I juxtapose it with Texas' schedule, you get a whole different kettle of fish. I get it all, but everybody played 12 or 13 games. I think that your proof is pretty well in your pudding, no matter what the schedule may have said. So with that caveat tossed in, let's dive into some of these numbers. LSU finished 7th in the SEC in scoring. They scored 30 a game. LSU finished 7th in yards per play. Now, when you talk about actual just gaining yards, total offense, LSU was 5th in the league. So you're looking at kind of the top of the middle tier of offense is kind of what LSU was at this point. And that's kind of what I saw. I saw a team that did a great job scoring points against South Carolina. I saw a team that did certainly a good enough job of scoring points against a tough Ole Miss defense. I saw a team that did its job against Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. I saw a team that really struggled against Texas A&M in the second half. I saw a team that really struggled against Alabama in the rain. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't a disaster. It was the top of the middle tier of the SEC offensively. Well, why? Well, it starts with the passing. That was the identity. And LSU threw the ball more than any team in the SEC this year. First in the league in pass attempts. They were second in the SEC in passing offense. They threw for 315 a game. Yards per attempt, a little bit middle of the pack. It's ninth because you threw it so often. Completion percentage, you were fifth, so you did complete a lot of your throws. And as far as just getting the ball in the end zone, LSU was third in the SEC in passing touchdowns. That is a really good passing offense. If I told you entering the season, brand new quarterback who had started one game in his entire career, in regards to the Southeastern Conference, with Quinn Ewers and with Jackson Dart and with, what goes on at Georgia with Beck and with Nico Iamaleava and with all these guys in the Southeastern Conference. Connor Wigman was thought of in that way early on. If I were to tell you that you were going to finish first in attempts, second in passing offense, third in passing touchdowns, and fifth in completion percentage, you would go, okay, that's a good passing offense. And I think everyone would have taken that with a brand new quarterback and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas gone. But you well know the other side of this coin. Rushing offense, 16th in a 16-team league, dead last. Rushing attempts per game, 16th in a 16-team league, dead last. Yards per carry, 11th, not good. And I can promise you this. No team is going to compete for an SEC championship, compete to get into the 12-team playoff, and compete to win a championship, which is the goal around here, finishing dead last in the SEC in rushing. And once again, you know they sucked at running the ball. I don't know if you knew for sure they were dead last, but they were dead last in the SEC in rushing. And I know the lines we were fed about how the boxes were stacked and we had to throw the ball and we were checking into throws because we didn't feel like the look was good enough for run. Phooey. You can't finish 16th in the SEC in rushing. Absolutely unacceptable at LSU. And so you look at some of the ancillary statistics that aren't the nuts and bolts there, which are yards and points. Sacks allowed. LSU allowed the fewest sacks in the Southeastern Conference. And say what you will about the offensive line. And that stat I just gave you, where they were 16th in the SEC in rushing, is an indictment on the offensive line, unquestionably. But I can also tell you that if you throw the ball more than anybody in the league, which LSU did, and you give up the fewest sacks in the SEC, that's a hell of a job. And that's a spot where I expect that LSU will take a step back next year, pass protection. Now, a lot of those guys were gone in the game on Tuesday night, and Garrett Nussmeier was not sacked, and he threw it almost 40 times. So that's a hopeful trend there, but just I got to call it like I see it. You throw it the most times in the league, and you give up the fewest sacks, that's pretty damn good. Now, you look to another indictment on this team offensively. In 20-plus yard plays created, you were sixth. That's mediocre. Okay. In 10-plus yard rushes, you were dead last. Could not create chunk runs at all. Not a surprise. You ran it fewer than anybody in the league, and you ran it for 10-plus yards fewer times than anybody in the league. However, you did a better job completing 20-yard passes, fourth in the league. You would figure that throwing it more than everybody. But and this is a little bit of a weird stat, but I think it does tell a story. You were dead last in the SEC in 50-plus yard passes. Now, 50-yard passes don't happen very often, and you can't count on them. They're not a huge part of anybody's offense, although Ole Miss creates a lot of them. But I would, in my estimation, if you are seeing stacked boxes, as they're telling me, that's why we can't run the ball, because the box is stacked, and your passing game is productive as anybody in the league, and you can't bust the top off, that's a problem. It might be schematic, but my guess is it's probably personnel-based because Chris Hilton came in and he did it twice against Oklahoma, he did it twice against Baylor. I think that's personnel. Hilton's coming back, Varian Brown's coming in. I think that number goes up next year. But again, it's another issue with the offense. If you're going to lean on the passing game significantly and you can't create big, huge chunk plays down the field consistently, and you're telling me there's stacked boxes, that's a problem. It's something they've absolutely got to look at. And then the final piece to this puzzle, your percentages, and then some of the other stats that we get to, like time of possession. On third downs, you were the best in the SEC. You converted 49% of your third downs. What that led to is a team that finished second in the SEC in time of possession. A lot of people say time of possession doesn't matter. I'd still like to win time of possession. I think having the ball is better than not having the ball. And I think LSU, although they couldn't run it, they could control the ball because they were as good as anybody in the SEC at completing short and intermediate passes, which is what you have to do a lot of on third down. That's why they were the best third down team in the league. Fourth down percentage, I don't really care about that. You were tied for 10th. You converted 50%. How aggressive was Brian Kelly? You were 8th in the conference in terms of times you attempted a fourth down. Here's a huge one, though. Huge statistic. Red zone touchdown percentage. LSU finished 14th in the SEC, third to last in red zone touchdown percentage. Only 56.6% of the time you got a touchdown. That comes back to the running game. It makes sense you're great on third down because you're really good at completing intermediate and short passes. It makes all the sense in the world that you stink in the red zone because you can't run the ball. As far as interceptions thrown, you were 11th. That means there were 10 teams that threw, that there were 5 teams that threw more than you, 6 teams that threw more than you. And then in turnovers, you were 6th, right in the middle of the pack as far as turnovers go. So the overview here is not jarring, and it wasn't meant to be jarring. It is what it is. You were really good at the short passing game. You didn't stretch the field well enough. You stunk running the football. It bit you in the red zone. And that's really what LSU was. And so if you're trying to get from a 4-loss team to a 2-loss team or a 1-loss team that competes for championships, you know what you got to do offensively. You have to run the ball better. That creates a better opportunity in the red zone. And you've got to find a way to stretch the field. And those two can go hand in hand. You run the ball better. Guys got to come up, stop the run. You can hit them over the top. LSU became one-dimensional. We're going to try to complete 8-yard passes. And that's what they did really well. And it led to a lot of third down conversions and good time of possession. And they scored some points. They were in the top. Let's see, what was the scoring offense? They were 7th in scoring and 5th in total offense. It was not a disaster. So I don't think that I would look at Joe Sloan's first year as a failure at all. I think I would look at it as flawed. And you know what the flaws are. You have to go get more offensive linemen. You've got to work on the run game and being more creative and productive in the run game with an understanding you can lean on a really good passing game, which is what LSU had. So that's the mission for the staff. 1, in creating the roster for next year, which they've done the majority of already. And 2, in what you work on in the spring, what you tell your guys in the summer, and what gets implemented in fall camp to go to Clemson and be a different football team. That's what's got to happen. If you'd like to take a look at all of this stuff that's written out and kind of my written piece on all of it, it's over at louisianasports.net there on the homepage. It's called, Statistically Speaking, the 2024 LSU Offense. And that's a look at the 2024 LSU offense. It's our Genesis opening drive here on this Friday. If you're looking for LSU football content, you can always find it at Hunt on LSU. That used to be only on YouTube, where we'd have all our LSU content right there. If you can still find on YouTube, but you can find it in podcast form as well. Just search Hunt on LSU. Wherever you find your podcast, you can find all of it right there. Like, subscribe, rate, review. Help get our content in front of as many eyes and ears as we possibly can. We appreciate y'all's help with that every single day. Our Friday show is brought to you by Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp. We'll step aside. Preston Guy, TigerBait.com is next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Boudreaux's Electrical Services. BoudreauxElectrical.com is the website. How about some peace of mind? Peace of mind, powerful thing. We live down here in South Louisiana. You understand that hurricanes happen, ice storms happen. Power outages are just part of our life down here in South Louisiana. You can eliminate that risk with Boudreaux's Electrical Services. Get a home standby generator installed as quickly as you can. Understand that when you start that process with Boudreaux's Electrical, you're going to be working with full-time Boudreaux's Electrical's employees from start to finish. They don't 1099 somebody to come handle your job. No, you'll deal with a full-time employee. They'll get the majority of that installation at your home done underground so that it looks nice, and it'll be done with the best quality in piping, wiring, tubing, so that your house is all set up and ready to go when that next hurricane season rolls around, and we know it's always coming. Give them a call at 985-397-1562. Again, that's 985-397-1562 or 225-393-89 in Gonzales. I'll give you the easy way every day. It's BoudreauxElectrical.com, BoudreauxElectrical.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp.
Chugging right along on a Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp. You can find them online at corksfishandshrimp.com. Preston Guy, TigerBait.com. With us each and every Friday. Joins us now on the Jim's Firearms Hotline. Preston, how we doing?
Hunt, what's going on, man? Doing a lot better after covering a win instead of a loss. as you and I predicted.
Yeah, I did predict that. Hester thinks I'm just an idiot. He fails to recognize that he picked LSU to win 4 times when they lost. But I guess there's nobility in that. There's no nobility in picking the other team when your team wins. So I understand. I walked in the studio this morning and he screamed at me. It's just the way it goes. But yeah, we both picked LSU to lose that game, and they did not. Why did they not lose the game?
Man, it's because a lot of guys stepped up in the roles that, we hadn't seen them previously step up, whether that was out of necessity or whatever it may be. They just did. Trey'Dez Green, 2 touchdowns, Chris Hilton, 2 big catches. And these were guys you needed to step up, given, you were very shorthanded with all the opt-outs and the NFL draft guys.
No doubt. How much credit you give Garrett Nussmeier for taking that cast of characters and scoring as many points as LSU did?
Quite a bit, but we've given him quite a bit of credit all season long. He has been the heart and soul of this offense. He clips 4,000 yards, and he's been the guy all year. So you knew you were going to have to rely on his right arm quite a bit. But thankfully, that was the one piece you could rely on that was a constant. But also his offensive line. You got to give those 4 guys playing out of position kudos for stepping up and keeping him off the ground. I believe there was 1 sack in the game, and he threw it quite a bit. So got to give him his praise.
How do you feel about Joe Sloan's first year as the offensive coordinator and play caller?
I think he did an adequate job. It was okay. I think there's a lot he should improve on. We talked about it on our post-game show, and I gave him a C+.
Can you elaborate on that C+? I feel like everyone's just sitting there listening going, yeah, they couldn't run the ball worth the flip and they turned it over a little bit too much, but they did create some yards. Is there any more nuance to it than that?
There was some good passing attack. I liked the balance he did. He had an aggressive approach this year. There were certain situations where he dialed up very creative play calls and adjusted, but there were also moments where I felt like he was just very tone deaf to his weaknesses as a team as well. I just think that it was a blend of being all right. And I also think that he was held back quite a bit. I don't think your receivers this year, you dealt with a ton of injuries, and I don't think your receivers were that great to begin with. So, and I think your offensive line not being able to run block all season long, that's a big inhibitor. So kudos for him for putting together the offensive numbers they did with those limitations.
Yeah, they were last in the SEC in rushing attempts per game and last in the SEC in rushing offense in terms of yards per game. Where do you think the rebuild for that starts in this offseason?
Oh, boy. Well, you got to go to the portal and get the guys to do it,
Do you feel like they've started that with the guys that they've added, the 2 on the offensive line, and then the young players that are going to fill some of those roles?
Yeah, I like the 2 offensive linemen they've brought in, man. I think that's going to help quite a bit. I do know they're going to be looking for more as the season goes on. But, they're going to be waiting. They're going to be patient and see who – they don't just want just anybody. They're wanting good guys, and we'll see. We'll see who comes up. I have a feeling that there might be guys still playing football who are going to be viable candidates.
It's kind of the what the grapevine is suggesting at this point. So we'll kind of leave it at that. Not to spoil my segment that's coming up here 1 hour from right now, where I talk about LSU's defense. But just in terms of the numbers, this defense was not very good.
No, it was pretty bad.
Yeah, we watched it, and there were times where they really showed up. But for the season as a whole, statistically, it was bad. What was your thought on its entirety?
So 445 yards passing. That is, you just cannot do that. I think it's quite abundant that they needed help in the secondary. Fortunately, at corner, they've got that coming. At safety, you got to bring in 2 safeties, not 1.
Yeah.
You got to. You just do not have what it takes to compete on your roster currently. You got to find some good quality players. And right now you brought nobody. Right now what you'd have to do is take some of these corners and give them reps at safety. And I think there's a few guys who are candidates to do that, but I do know you definitely prefer to get a true safety in who experience and quality reps at safety.
When we talk about the poor safety play, are you more so speaking about the passing game or the running game?
I'm sorry, what was that, Hunt?
When we talk about the safety play not being good enough, and Brian Kelly said it on the record, so we're not making this up. He said we got to get more production at safety. Do you immediately go to the passing game, or you go to the running game where they've got to get better at safety?
Man, I get PTSD thinking about clips of Sage Ryan taking an over-aggressive ankle and missing the tackle. So, man, it's got to be passing, though. I mean, it has to be your biggest area of struggle with that safety position, just because they cover so many more people. But, I mean, both were just so awful this year. And if you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, they were just so bad. I mean, you got to improve in both areas. I don't want to pick one, Hunt. I'm going to cop out of that.
That's understandable. None of it was fantastic, that's for sure, and they've got to shore that up moving into 2025. As we sit here, we got a long way to go, but kind of what's your expectation for LSU in 2025? Where do you think they'll be ranked in the preseason as a public perception, and then what do you think that the reasonable expectation is?
I was listening to the guys on before you about this, Handy talk about that. They were thinking right outside the top 5. I don't know that they're going to get the national praise and recognition that we are locally looking at this roster. So I think maybe top 10, barely, is what I'm thinking. Maybe like 10, 11, something like that. Because, I mean, yeah, people are going to look up at the portal rankings, see, oh, you brought in the number 1 class. Okay, that's great. But, I'm not so certain that across the board there's going to be recognition of it. But that being said, I think this is a roster already that's a playoff roster, and I think that you've got chances to improve this thing and possibly make a championship run, but we'll see.
I do have to ask this. In the last 15, 18 hours or so, have you been chirped from South Bend, Indiana at all?
You best believe I have, man. You best believe. They've come to our YouTube channel. Now, my Twitter has been peacefully quiet. And, look, Hon, it's just one of those things right now. You just got to hush and wait. Yeah, I think it's too early to deliver judgment. And, of course, the optics are bad for Brian Kelly and great for Marcus Freeman in Notre Dame right now.
At the moment, we'll see. But as I mentioned in the chat on the morning show, as they were talking about it, somebody was like, "Oh, Brian Kelly looks terrible now." And I said, "Well, Brian Kelly got to the Final 2 with Notre Dame, and he got to the Final 4 a couple of times.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
He's been here.
He's been here 3 times. Is that right?
Right.
I mean, come on.
So we'll see. It's not any of Brian Kelly's concern at this point, but we'll monitor it from afar. Preston, we appreciate some time. Have a great weekend, man.
All right, thank you, Hunt.
Preston Guy, TigerBait.com. Catch him on that YouTube channel and, of course, on Twitter as well. Preston has kind of been back and forth with the guys in South Bend since Brian Kelly elected to leave, and all the Notre Dame fans, of course, immediately turned on him and said he was terrible and wasn't good, and they were glad he was gone and all that kind of stuff. And Preston's kind of kept up with that, and he has a way of poking the bear on Twitter at times, and I, for one, really appreciate it because it's greatly entertaining. But then sometimes you have to pay the piper when Notre Dame posts a big win. If he's going to chirp when Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois, which we saw earlier, they're going to come back when they go down to New Orleans and take down the Dogs, which certainly happened last night. Hester and T-Bob and I were having an interesting conversation about that this morning, and they think I'm an idiot, and I probably am an idiot. They played college football, and I watch college football. But my kind of thought on that whole situation is that I feel like we in the SEC over the last 20 years have seen some of these just absolute behemoths of rosters. We've seen it with LSU. We've seen it with Alabama. We've seen it with Georgia. We've seen it with Florida, where you've just got a team and just nobody can stop them. And I just don't sense that this year. I think that Ohio State's the best team, but they've certainly played a dud a month ago, and some of those teams just didn't play duds. They just rolled everybody. And because I don't see that, elite team that you can just identify and see it outside of Ohio State doing that, what they did to Tennessee and to Oregon, it just stands to reason why some other teams could show up. I mean, it's evident to everybody. The Georgia team that we watched last night is not the Georgia team from 4 years ago and 3 years ago. It's just not. It's not the same. There's not as many top 10 picks, top 20 picks. They just didn't quite have the juice. And then you take your starting quarterback out of the mix, and it's just not the level that we have seen. And it certainly stands to reason that Notre Dame is elevated a little bit, but I don't think that it's a situation where they caught Georgia. I think Georgia came back to the pack. Everybody does except Saban. And that's just the way that it kind of is. So that was just my 2 cents. We'll talk a little bit more about the Sugar Bowl moving forward. I thought it was a little bit interesting, but we got other things to do here on the show today. I got to talk Saints and Bucks as we get ready to close down the Saints season. We'll do some of that. Got to get you ready for the final week in the NFL. And I've got my thoughts on LSU and Vanderbilt tomorrow. LSU and Vandy will open up SEC play inside the PMAC. Kevin Ingram is the play-by-play man for the Vanderbilt Commodores. He will join us to talk about that club coming up next.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
One Bath and Closets. OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Duvall and his team, 30 years redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. Safety is a big, big deal, especially when you talk about people that are aging and they're in the bathroom. That can be a hazardous situation. Slips and falls can be really, really tough situations. Do your best to mitigate against that. David Duvall and his team can help you with that. They can put in non-slip floors. They can put in guardrails near the slippery areas. They can put walk-in tubs in for convenience and safety. They can put benches in showers. All these things can ensure but they can help mitigate against the issues that could arise in the bathrooms. If you've got a loved one in your life that wants to stay at home, but you're a little bit concerned about that situation in the bathroom, call David Duvall at One Bath and Closets and see what he can do for you. They've got financing options available, 0% for 18 months. If you qualify, start that process today at onebathandclosets.com. You can get a free consultation, see pictures of their fantastic work. They can see some reviews from their satisfied customers. Check them out online. It's One Bath and Closets, online at onebathandclosets.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Quirks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp.
Working towards the weekend, Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show, presented by Corks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp. I think y'all are well aware of my affinity for hoops, specifically LSU hoops. Love it. And I'll admit, the last 3 weeks have been rough. Watching Stetson, UNO, and Mississippi Valley State come in here and get beat by 60 is just not very interesting. Well, now I'm interested because SEC play is upon us, and the Southeastern Conference is coming off the best non-conference run any of us have ever seen, and it goes all the way through the league. Vanderbilt's certainly no exception there in year one under Mark Byington. Commodores come into Baton Rouge at 12-1 to start conference play, and I'm fired up to talk about it. Kevin Ingram will be on the call for Vanderbilt tomorrow courtside in the PMAC. He's good enough to give us a little bit of time here on this Friday. Kevin, thanks for that time. How are you?
Doing good, Hud. How are you, man?
Doing very well. Excited for the ball game tomorrow, as I know most in Nashville are as well. Let's talk about this team, specifically head coach Mark Byington in his first year. Kind of what was the mission when he showed up?
Yeah, the mission was just to get the program back turned around and in a spot where it had a chance to go to the NCAA tournament on a regular basis. And so far, so good. It's really gone well. It's an exciting style of basketball. Teams averaging 85, 86 points a game. And it's a fun style. And they've reloaded the roster with a lot of veteran players, and that's served this team well. One notable freshman in Tyler Tanner, who's been really good. But, yeah, it's just been really fun so far. And some pretty nice wins, made our way through non-conference. As you talked about, there's some games that you won that were pretty lopsided, and there are also some wins that were good. 4 high major wins plus Nevada in a tournament we played over in Charleston. So, yeah, it's been a fun season so far.
It seems like it's been a lot of fun. You mentioned the points per game. I'm also looking just at the height as a lot of these contributors, and I'm seeing a lot of 6'7" and under. Is it fair to say that Vanderbilt's going to play pretty small tomorrow?
Yeah, that's the thing. Not really a true post player, but you do have a few players here around the 6'7", 6'8" range. Devin McLaughlin certainly fits that description. He's been really good. Coming off a third double-double of the season last time out against New Orleans in the last non-conference game. He's been really efficient shooting the ball. He stepped out and made some threes, but just one of those veteran dudes, as I talked about. He had played at Boston College and really good rebounder, a good scorer. You got Jalen Carey, who's a guy who came with Coach Byington from James Madison. He's a sophomore, so a little bit earlier in his career. But then, things a little bit thin among the front court players, but you got a lot of different options and ways you can play and a lot of interchangeable parts of this team. So I know we're going to get into some situations in the SEC where you wish you had another big or two, but I think this team will figure out ways to work around that, and really has so far, and it's worked out well.
Yeah, one of the ways is to steal the ball a lot. You've got a bunch of quick, smaller guys, and Vanderbilt steers it as well as anybody in the country, number 1 in the country in steals per game at almost 11. Does that come from pressing, instincts, relentless ball pressure? I mean, how do you lead the nation in steals at this point?
Yeah, a lot of it really is ball pressure, not necessarily cranking up a press or anything like that. It's pressure out on the perimeter that's causing a whole lot of the steals. I talked about Tyler Tanner. He's a freshman. He leads every freshman in the country, has right around 30 steals already through the first 13 games. Grant Huffman, a veteran guy who came over from Davidson, he's right there as well. But you have a lot of guys that just get some knockaways, and all of a sudden you get the steal, you're going the other direction, and you're in transition. Tyler Tanner, though, has led the way. When he comes into the game, the energy really picks up, the tempo picks up, and he's been a big part of those steals for Vanderbilt. And you look at turnovers and turnover margin, Vanderbilt's been terrific in those categories. That's
absolutely going to be the key for LSU in the game tomorrow, I think, is taking care of the ball. I saw this statistic from Vanderbilt Sports Info. Tyler Tanner, as a freshman, played 270 minutes without a turnover. I would be impressed if he went to LSU's rec center against the students and didn't turn it over in 270 minutes. That says a lot to me for a freshman.
Yeah, he's been super efficient, and just a guy he doesn't play like a true freshman now. Obviously, the competition will get tougher as we get into SEC play, but he's just a really savvy young player. Both his parents were college basketball players, so he was able to lean on that, I'm sure, growing up. And he played in a really good program. He's from around here. He played at Brentwood Academy, which is just south of Nashville. But yeah, that assist to turnover number is really remarkable, and I almost don't want to talk about it too much because you feel like you might jinx it. I mean, to make it 13 games, I don't care who you are, where you are in your career, to make it 13 games without a single turnover is really hard to do.
It really is. Has there been an Achilles heel for Vanderbilt that has caused Mark Byington to lose a little bit of sleep? I know Matt McMahon's extremely concerned about defensive rebounding and turning the ball over. Is there a weakness that Vanderbilt's had at some point?
One thing I would point to maybe is inconsistent three-point shooting. Now, that's been really good the last handful of games. But when this team makes threes, it's really dangerous and really hard to stop, and those points are going to stack up in a hurry. So much of the game is about obviously getting takeaways and turning those into transition points. But three-point shooting is such a key part of what this team does. If this team can make 10 or 12 three-pointers and shoot in the mid-30s, I really like this group's chances. That was a little up and down early in the season, but as this non-conference portion went along, they've been able to make them on a more consistent basis. You got a guy like Tyler Nickel, who's an excellent just knockdown shooter. You got several guys in this team that can really shoot it well from behind the three-point line. But to me, that's a real key and something that's maybe you like to see a little bit more consistent on a game-to-game basis.
Jason Edwards leads this team in scoring by a wide margin. He's at about 19 points a game, and Devin McLaughlin's second at around 12. But he's only started half the games. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, he started the first chunk of games, and then Mark Byington decided to make a change and bring him off the bench and start Chris Magnon, who's a little bit bigger. And it's worked out great. It's one of those things where Coach looks at it and says, it doesn't really matter who starts because everybody's going to play the same amount of minutes pretty much either way. But when he comes in off the bench, you can usually count on him at about 3 or 4 minutes of the game. He really provides a jolt of energy and scoring. Just one of those players that knows how to put the ball in the basket, whether he's shooting threes, driving to the bucket. He's able to get in there and finish. He's not very big. He's only about 6 feet tall, but he knows how to score. He knows how to get to the free throw line. He's an excellent free throw shooter. And again, I think coming off the bench or starting, I don't know that it makes that much difference for this team because there's so many interchangeable parts.
I'm curious if you've talked to Coach Byington about the run that the SEC has been on and kind of his impressions in his first year in the league. I'm personally, as an LSU fan, very intimidated by what the next 18 games are going to bring because the league has been so good. I'm curious if y'all have had any of those discussions and just how important this would be. These two teams were picked kind of towards the bottom of the SEC. We know there are a lot of top 15 teams in the league too. So just any discussions that you may have had with him about what's to come over the next couple of months.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit, even in this post game after the New Orleans game back on Monday night. He's like, all right, we're ready to go into this. What's been a historical run for the SEC so far. The conference record combined is just crazy. Yeah. And I know you have 3 unbeaten teams, and one of them will be not unbeaten after tomorrow with Kentucky and Florida facing. Or there will be some that aren't unbeaten. I correct myself there, but But yeah, he's talked a little about how rough it's going to be, and I think he looks forward to the challenge. I mean, this is his first lap around the SEC, and I know Matt McMahon probably felt similar things, when he took his first lap around the league. But it's going to be really tough. This is going to be an 18-game, just absolute meat grinder. If you can come out with 8 or 9 wins, I think you're going to feel pretty good about your chances of getting to the NCAA tournament. But you want to get off to a good start. You don't want to put yourself behind to where you put pressure on yourself to have to win games as the season goes along. So I feel like this game tomorrow is really important for both these teams.
No doubt about it. LSU won 9 league games last year, but because they were so poor in the non-conference, they didn't get in. Nobody did that in the league this year. Everybody's put themselves in position to get there if you're around 500. So we'll see as it all starts tomorrow. Kevin, thanks so much for a little bit of time. Safe travels, and have a great call.
All right, sounds good, Hunter. Appreciate the time.
He's Kevin Ingram, play-by-play voice of Vanderbilt basketball as Tigers indoors tomorrow from the PMAC. I've been really impressed with Mark Byington's team in year one there. Jerry Stackhouse, when I watched Vanderbilt play during his time there, they ran great offense. They created some looks. He just did not ever get the dudes. And I don't know if it was because he hadn't spent a lot of time in college basketball and didn't really know how to work the recruiting angle. I don't know if that Vanderbilt didn't show up in an NIL perspective so he couldn't get players to come. But like when you're being led by a guy named like Ezra Magnon, who he was for a couple of years, who's a really good college player, but like he's a point guard that couldn't even attempt threes. It's just hard to win games when that's your main dude who's just trying to fly in there at 6'1" and win at the rim. It's just a hard way to win games, and it just never clicked for Stackhouse, and it was a talent acquisition thing. And so you look at Mark Byington, and he's gone out and assembled a roster a certain way. They're going to play a little bit smaller. They're going to play fast. They're efficient, really efficient on the offensive end, and they've been great stealing the ball on defense. I'll give you kind of my full preview on Vanderbilt in the second hour, but this is just a huge game for LSU and Vanderbilt. I've talked about this a lot, and I'll do it again in hour 2, but the pathway to LSU making the NCAA tournament, which is what we all want, it goes through the PMAC. You just cannot expect, and again, I don't know exactly where they go. I don't have the schedule memorized. You cannot expect to make a living, go into College Station and go into Fayetteville and go into Gainesville and go into Rupp and go into Auburn. Like you're just not going to get a bunch of those. It's just not in the cards. You have to take advantage of some of your games at home, especially against the teams in the bottom half of the league in terms of talent. Vanderbilt is that. Yes, they are 12-1. Yes, they have got some nice wins. They beat TCU by 9. They hammered Virginia Tech on the road by 16. Their only loss is to a good Drake team earlier this year. So they've got some wins, but they're not an uber talented team. They're not going to put 2 guys into the lottery. This is a game LSU desperately needs to win tomorrow. I think everyone is aware of that, and I did this yesterday. I'm going to do it again today, shamelessly. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I got an LSU hat on, an LSU shirt on, an LSU pullover on. I'm not ashamed to do it at all. If you're listening and you're within earshot and you're in South Louisiana and can get to the PMAC tomorrow, I think it'll be well worth your time, and it will certainly help this LSU basketball team. They've been playing in an empty arena for good reason against terrible teams while school's been out over the last month. And school's still not in at this point. So the student section could be a little bit light tomorrow. If you can fill that place up tomorrow as best you can, I would highly, highly recommend that you go check that out, because LSU needs your help, and they need to try to win this game. Again, not a single bit of shame in the local radio guy who's quote-unquote unbiased, not unbiased, would like you to go to the PMAC for the game tomorrow and see if LSU can't start conference play with the win. It's important that LSU gets off to a good start, because there's a meat grinder right there in the middle there where it's going to be hard to find wins anywhere. So when Vanderbilt comes to town, got to try to find a way to get one, and they'll do it tomorrow for an afternoon tip-off. All right, we'll come back and close out the hour. A little bit of Saints conversation as they finish things up with the Bucs, and then get you ready for the NFL weekend at the top of hour number 2. All right, come back with us. Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show. You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show, brought to you by Quirks, Cajun fried fish and shrimp.
Saints will wrap up their season in Tampa on Sunday. It's a noon kick on Fox. Tampa, a 13.5-point favorite in this game, and for good reason. Bucs have everything to play for. With a win, they clinch the NFC South. The Saints with very little to play for other than truly the spirits of the city, which are obviously going through a bad week with the attacks there on Bourbon Street. As I look at this game, I'm not going to sit here and break down the X's and O's very much. I don't think anybody's here for a ton of that. My concern is, and it's not really a concern, it's just a suggestion, there's no reason for Alvin Kamara, Derek Carr, and Chris Olave to go out there. I know that Chris Olave has returned to practice this week. I know that Alvin Kamara and Derek Carr have not to this point. It's admirable if Kamara wants to try to get that 1,000-yard season. Is it necessary or reasonable? No. Derek Carr does not need to go out there with a broken hand and play in this game against Tampa. That's not really proving anything. It's not really helping anything. I'm certain there are some people in Atlanta that might feel differently, but since when have the Saints ever tried to appease anything that anybody in Atlanta is trying to do? And then Chris Olave, you're dealing with concussion. And I realize he's been out there at practice, been working out, and he'd like to go out there and play a little bit of football. Check's going to cash whether you're out there or not. I would just as soon not go out there. That's a scary hit that he took about a month ago, and there's just no issue in forcing it. So to me, the biggest issue is the Saints veterans, who I'm sure admirably want to play. And there's nothing in their past that would suggest anything different. Alvin Kamara has been a consummate professional every single step of the way, even through this contract negotiation and playing through pain all year long for a team that was mired in a 7-game losing streak. Derek Carr has shown toughness over any quality that he's shown in New Orleans. He's been tough as nails and tried to go out there and play, and it's been very, very admirable, but he's been banged up because guess what? Saints offensive line hasn't been very good because they've been banged up. So just sit it out. It's one more game. Just sit it out. And then as far as Chris Olave, take care of yourself. You want to come back next year? I'm all for it. That's awesome. And I think that there's reason to expect that he will do that. But I just don't think there's any reason for those three teams to play. There is a little bit of a streak on the line here for the Saints. They've been held below 20 points in 5 straight games entering Sunday. If they're held below 20 points on Sunday, which I believe they will be, that'll break a tie for their longest single-season streak since 1996. It's about 20 years of futility there actually 30 years of futility there. God, that's just hard to go back that far and consider that that's how old I am. But yeah, it's been a long time since the Saints have been this bad on offense. And so, again, injecting those guys into it, which was already a bad unit, I just don't see any sort of anything to... There's no reason to push it, is what I should say. Mike Evans does have a reason to push it on Sunday. Mike Evans needs 85 yards to tie Jerry Rice for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons in NFL history with 11. He's only gotten 85 yards in his career 3 times against the Saints, and the last time was 2018. What do we know about this entire run with the Saints? Marshawn Lattimore has very often been on the other side. That's been a talking point when these two teams have gotten together year after year after year. Well, Marshawn Lattimore is now in Washington. So Mike Evans probably licking his chops, and I would imagine Baker Mayfield has every intention of getting his guy the ball for 85 yards in the game coming up on Sunday. Again, I think if you're trying to find a local angle here with the Saints, it's not revolving around draft picks, which we talked to Luke Johnson yesterday about that. You're really not guaranteed to move much. It's looking like you're right around 10th. You're not going to fall back to 13 or 14. You're not going to move up to 6. Like, you're looking to be locked in somewhere around 10 or 11, no matter what your outcome is in this game on Sunday. So that's not really a storyline. Clyde Edwards-Helaire likely to get a big amount of carries in this game on Sunday because you're looking at Alvin Kamara likely not being available and Kendre Miller likely not being available as he comes off of a concussion last week. So it'll be Clyde. We'll see if he can find some creases, find a reason for the Saints to keep him around for another year. Ross Jackson wrote a great piece on LouisianaSports.net last week after the game about how meaningful it was for Clyde to put on that uniform and to play in the Dome for that city when he grew up just down the road here in Baton Rouge. So he'll get a big opportunity in the game coming up on Sunday. I've kind of exhausted the Spencer Rattler storyline. We know that the offensive line has not been great and that the wide receiving core is kind of a group of misfit toys at this point. I'm disappointed in the Saints defensively and the way that they've played really on every level. You would hope that the corners kind of show some sort of shine of life. They were not good against a bad Raiders team. So there's just not a lot of meat on this Saints bone, and my contention is they probably lose this game by 20 points or so and finish this season 5-12 and then go into what is a much more interesting chapter in the New Orleans Saints story, which is what direction does this franchise go from right here? You start the opportunity to go try to hire a coach. Mike Vrabel is reportedly interviewing with the Jets this weekend. He is eligible to do so after his contract with the Browns went up. I would assume the Saints would like to talk with him as well. And that's kind of the state of mind that a lot of Saints fans are in. What's next? And it doesn't have a lot to do with what's going on in Tampa on Sunday at noon. So Tampa's a 13.5-point favorite. I would lay those points and not feel bad about it at all. I would suggest that Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans probably have a big day against a weakened Saints defense, and I just don't think the Saints are going to have a ton of success offensively because they haven't had success offensively in over a month. So that's where I am on Saints and Bucks. Give me a final score of somewhere in the neighborhood of 31-13. I will take the Tampa Bay Bucks to win and cover down there at Raymond James in Tampa. That's it for hour number 1 here on the Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. We're brought to you by Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp. Feeding the office, birthday party coming up, or just got a Hester-sized family. Corks, Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp, fantastic on their catering game. Check out the menu, corksfishandshrimp.com. We'll come back and get you ready for the final week of the NFL regular season, plus my thoughts on LSU and Vanderbilt tomorrow. That's all coming up in our final hour of the week. It's a Friday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge. GenesisofBatonRouge.com is the website. Every car that's on the lot is online at GenesisofBatonRouge.com. When you think wow, that's a real bad tongue twister there. When you think Genesis, you should think luxury. When you think luxury, don't think, I can't afford that. Go buy and try. Go buy and see. Work with one of their brand ambassadors. See what's available to you over there at Genesis. They've got phenomenal sedans all the way up through the SUVs, and they are fine vehicles. I have sat behind the wheel of a number of them, and they are phenomenal. Just try it out. If you're on Airline Highway, you're shopping for a car, that's where most people shop for cars in Baton Rouge, then come on by and make one more stop. It's there at Airline and Pico across from Women's Hospital. Got phenomenal deals with all their cars, including a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty on all of them, 3 years of complimentary maintenance on all of them. Every car on the lot is online at GenesisofBatonRouge.com. That is GenesisofBatonRouge.com.